On behalf of all of us in this room, thank you so much for your leadership and your vision, and the floor is yours. Please join me in a round of applause for the Congressman.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Heather, thank you so much for those kind words. I really am touched by that and appreciate what you shared. Thank you so much. Your leadership at the Space Foundation is just amazing and will have worldwide impact, not just national impact. So thank you all for being here. What a distinguished group of people. This is really amazing. I'm really honored to be here. And for all of you who are watching the streaming version of this, thank you for joining in as well. I want to thank everyone for making this possible. There are a lot of folks, a lot of organizations that came together for this. First of all, I want to thank the Hudson Institute for hosting this event, whose building we're in at this moment. They share my sense of urgency over hypersonics development and other important issues of national defense. And they've added this issue to the many other conversations that they are influencing and stimulating. You know, they have become a leading player in the think tank community. They have an amazing brain trust. Some of their fellows are here today. Some of their staff are here today, of course. Ryan Tully, who used to be on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee until recently as professional staff, and others, or Rebecca, yourself, and I know there are others who are here today in that same category. It's very impressive what you bring to the table. And Major General Heather Pringle, I thank you. I thank the Space Foundation for co-sponsoring this event. As we know, she was the commander at AFREL and did amazing work down there. I was down there one time when you were building a hypersonic vehicle. Or maybe that was before your command, but that's the kind of work that AFREL has done and is so amazing. And the Space Foundation, as you may know, it hosts and puts on the biggest space event in the world each year, the Space Symposium in Colorado Springs, every April. Last year, this last April, 12,000 people attended, and 47 countries were represented there. So that's an amazing thing that they do every single year. I also want to thank the other panelists in our panels later this morning. Rebecca, yourself, you're one of these folks. You're going to be moderating and quizzing me during the fireside chat. 18 years ago, I think you must have been in high school or something. You were a child prodigy or something like that. But I do remember, and fondly, the times many times we've gotten together and spoken about missile defense and other critical issues for national security. And also, you were a trusted voice on the Commission on the Strategic Posture of the United States, and you're on U.S. Stratcom's advisory board. So we really appreciate that. We have other panelists who have worked tirelessly and who bring an incredible expertise to the table. My thanks to Admiral Sandy Winnefeld, a former vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and a U.S. Northern Commander. You bring a unique and vital perspective to the need for hypersonics and the defense of hypersonics that might be used against us. Thank you also to Mr. Mike White, the former principal director of hypersonics in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and Dr. John Plum, former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space. Both have graciously agreed to come out of their retirement for today to be part of this important symposium, and they'll provide their in-depth analysis for both offensive and defensive systems and the test infrastructure needed to make that happen. In Congress, whenever they testified in front of our committee or subcommittee, I always listened very carefully to their testimony because they provided simply the best testimony available. And later this afternoon, I'll be pleased to be joined by Representatives Don Bacon, Don Norcross, and Vince Fong, a bipartisan group of my colleagues from the House. These are people who are leaders and are becoming leaders in the field of national security. So they will add a great perspective also. And also just thanks to all of the various staffers at the Hudson Institute and Space Foundation and my personal staffers like Michael Curcio and others who are my national security advisor and all the others who are providing such an amazing background. Okay, as Rebecca mentioned, or Heather mentioned, I am retiring at the end of this year after 9 terms in Congress, and it was my highest honor to be the chairman of the House Armed Services Strategic Forces Subcommittee. And that committee oversees our nuclear, missile defense, hypersonic, and military space programs. And this has given me a unique perspective to some of our nation's most pressing threats. We hear things in different closed and open hearings that keep you awake at night. But it's important to be aware of these threats. Part of my job in Congress is to take this message to other members of Congress who don't get the almost daily threat briefings or other briefings that we need to have. And so sometimes there's a gap that we have to fill in and educate our fellow colleagues in Congress. But I have fought hard to ensure that the U.S. stays at the forefront of advances in warfare. And I and others will sound the alarm when we're falling behind. And of course, that's why we're doing this Hypersonic Symposium today, because we are behind. A little bit more about that in a minute. Also, we have other pressing issues like nuclear modernization and the increasingly contested space domain. But hypersonic weapons is something that's of particular concern to me and why I've jumped into this in recent years. China is fielding massive amounts of hypersonics. They want to have multitudes of these by the end of the decade, but they already have a lot fielded. Russia has some hypersonic capability. We've seen that in Ukraine, unfortunately, where it's led to the loss of a lot of life. But they're behind China, but they're still way ahead of us. Russia has been researching hypersonic technology for the past 40 years, and it's things like the air-launched Kinzhal have been seen to be used in Ukraine. The Chinese have demonstrated a high pace of flight testing, resulting in the rapid advancement of its conventional and even nuclear-armed hypersonic missile technology. And both countries, as I stated, have operational capabilities. The Chinese Communist Party will stop at nothing to show its dominance if it can do so, and we have to pay attention to that. You know, we were at one time the leader in hypersonic technology, and some would even say that we invented it. Back in the early 60s, Neil Armstrong achieved hypersonic speeds in the X-15. Even years before he was the first person to walk on the moon. 2 decades later, in his State of the Union address on February 4th, 1986, Ronald Reagan declared that the nation would embark on developing a hypersonic aircraft capable of flying from Washington to Tokyo in 2 hours. We all know what he did with SDI, but he was also wanting to be on the forefront of, and the U.S. to be on the forefront of hypersonics. Ultimately, these and other hypersonic programs did not survive years of hollowed out defense budgets. And unfortunately, we were needing to focus on counterterrorism operations. And these divided our attention and kept us from focusing primarily on great power competition. As a result, technologies such as scramjet engines or thermal protection engines that we could have developed have yet to come to fruition. So we must correct this trajectory now. Since taking over as chairman of the subcommittee, we've made many strides in progressing both our offensive capabilities and our sensing capabilities, and we're beginning work on defensive capabilities. However, much more needs to be done. We have brought the Army to the point where LRHW is transitioning from RICTO to PEO missile systems. Earlier this year, the Navy completed a successful stool test of conventional prompt strike. The Air Force successfully tested Arrow in China's backyard. However, I believe it is a short-sighted decision that the Air Force has not yet moved the system into production, and I would urge Secretary Kendall to do so. We must also continue to invest in fielding the HACM and HALO systems. My motivation to call attention to these issues is not just because China and Russia have these systems. Some people have accused us of just being copycats. If they have it, we have to have it. No, it's not that at all. Our military commanders tell us that they will need potentially to strike a specific set of highly important targets that are at a great distance early in a conflict with a high degree of confidence. Right now, we only have slow cruise missiles with limited range or ballistic missiles with predictable trajectories. These weapons will not get the job done when the enemy has a full magazine of missile defense interceptors. We need something that can go fast, go far, and evade defenses. That's also why we need to modernize our own air defenses to neutralize the threat of an attack by hypersonic missiles against our homeland. Fundamental to our defense is developing sensors that can provide quality fire control data to our effectors. I was pleased to see HBTSS launched earlier this year, but we must build on that capability by fully transitioning these sensors and the fire control quality data they provide to the proliferated warfighting space architecture. Investing in these kinds of sensors would be futile without effectors that can close the kill chain faster and at a greater distance. Patriot and SM-6 successfully engaging hypersonic missiles in the terminal phase are too close for comfort. That is why I push to accelerate the development of the glide phase interceptor in the National Defense Authorization Act. The law directs the Department of Defense to field this system by 2029. Fielding this system later, such as 2035, will be, as Vice Admiral Hill has said in recent testimony, irrelevant. That's simply too late. I firmly believe that directed energy and microwave systems are critical for the future of missile defense. And not only against slower and less exquisite threats, such as we're seeing in the Middle East, but also against hypersonics. To follow through on this, we must chart a solid way forward, and it begins with effective testing. Let me be clear, we do not test enough, and we don't test in the right way. Earlier this year, my subcommittee heard from George Rumford, the director of the Test Resource Management Center, or TRMC. He testified that he would like to do a flight test every week to mature our hypersonics program. I agree with him, this is vital. But right now, we hardly test every quarter. We need to start flying more often and get comfortable with incurring risks that are associated with a higher test cadence. One of my top priorities in this year's NDAA was to bolster the MACH-TB program. I believe the Pentagon needs to fully resource this as a program of record next year. If it does not, Congress should mandate it in the NDAA to include forcing the DoD to provide a full resource portfolio for it. We also need to start testing over land. Over water testing is severely limited by range resources, instrumentation, and time. That is why DoD must follow Congress's mandate to designate an overland corridor for hypersonic testing. And we must leverage partnerships such as AUKUS agreement. Admiral, you said you just came from overseas, and I will bet AUKUS was part of your discussion there. We can increase the technological readiness levels of key partners and allies by doing this kind of partnering. And we must incorporate hypersonic defense into EUCOM and INDOPACOM training and exercises. And this effort must also include the individual services in the role of organizing, training, and equipping our forces. One example would be the Navy's exercise Gray Flag. Another idea is to include offensive and defensive hypersonic scenarios into the various pre-deployment exercises our battle groups and formations go through. The first time a sailor sees a hypersonic threat on an Aegis fire control system should not be in combat. Most importantly, Congress must consistently pass predictable and sustained funding. Some argue that our defense budget is too bloating. I disagree with this. While I believe we must constantly strive for efficiencies in all facets of government spending, it is a fact that defense budget as a percentage of GDP is approaching historic lows at a time when the world is experiencing destabilizing forces not seen in generations. Look at the Middle East. Look at Eastern Europe. Look at what's being threatened in the Pacific. Lastly, I think most of you in this room would agree that we can no longer afford continuing resolutions that greatly disrupt program development and highly discourage industry from making the capital investments necessary to execute them. You know, it's been months since the House passed over to the Senate the National Defense Authorization Act and the Defense Appropriation Bills. And the Senate has simply sat on those and done almost nothing. So this is one of the things that has to change. Now, I realize the points I've laid out here today are ambitious, but we must not lose our focus again. Ronald Reagan set a vision for our nation 38 years ago to lead in hypersonic technology, and it's time that we as a nation follow through. To that end, I believe we have gathered the right people from government, industry, and academia to reinvigorate Reagan's initiative. Many of you are here in this room today. I hope this event is the first of many that gathers the right people together to discuss the progress we've made and to chart a path forward to ensure that our nation does not fall behind again. While I may be leaving Congress in 3 months, I fully intend to stay engaged and working with all of you in the future. I know that we are in good hands with the kind of talent that we have today, and once again, that I see represented here in this room. Thank you all for being here and everything you do to advance this critical capability, and thank you for everything you do to support our national defense.